Hello developers, welcome to Devistry. So today I want to show you an extremely helpful skill when it comes to creating reusable components with React and specifically Tailwind and also with TypeScript. So what do I mean with a reusable component? So instead of, if I want a button, as you can see I'm working with buttons here, just creating a button element and adding my custom content and then styling the button manually. So for example, I want to say BG black text white. Now I have this black and white text button. Instead of doing that, what we could also do is to define components which kind of do the default stuff for us. For example, I've created this button component and I can add my text. And by default, it will look like this primary styling, but I can override it with some other options. I've created all of these variants that I might use quite a lot. For example, if I want a button that is, some kind of dangerous or permanent action, I might make it into this danger variant. And if I want it to be larger, I have a size property that I can set this to be large. Now I have a large danger button. So we have all of these variants set up. It's really easy to quickly add these buttons, and if I wanted to, let's say I want to make this text bold, I can even just add my own class name with Tailwind classes, font bold, and now we've overridden that class. I can of course add all of the attributes that you would be able to put on any other button, including events like onClick. So I would be able to run a function like alert click, and now I have added the functionality to the button. But the default styling and the different types of styling, different categories or variants, we can just select. So it's really, really cool that we are just hiding that behind just a button tag and a couple of tags, and not have all of the messy styling and the conditional checks of which variant do we want, which size do we want. That's all hidden in this component. So that is what I mean with reusable components. They're components that you use quite often, like the normal button, maybe a secondary button, or this danger, or maybe a success button, which is green. You can just define a variant in the component, and then you just have to select them. That's what we're going to work on in this video. Alright, so if you want to follow along with this video, all I have done here in this project is to set up a new React project using Vite, so running npm create Vite. And I've basically emptied the app component to really just show an h1. And then we have this div which spaces its content out. And here we're going to add some buttons, which will be our reusable components we'll be building in this video. That's really all I have. So I've also, of course, installed Tailwind, just following the Tailwind setup on their website, specifically for Vite and React. All right, so that is all set up. Let's go ahead and create a components folder for our button.tsx component. And we're going to export default function button. Now, of course, our button component will represent a button element, so just a normal HTML button element. But what I don't want to do is hard code stuff in here. I don't want to say like click me, right? And I don't want to hard code the styling, for example, border and rounded, medium or whatever. So I don't want that, because if I do that, we don't have reusable buttons. Well, we kind of have reusable buttons, but if I now apply this button component, we have this. It's kind of a vague border. Let's make it border black. So we have this black border and we have this button that says click me. It looks horrible. I mean, I haven't spent too much time styling this. But we can now have this button component. It doesn't do anything. It is technically reusable because I can just add more buttons if I want to. But that's not really what we're after. So the very first thing I would like to do is to be able to customize which text the button shows. And the easiest way to do that is to actually make this a component with an opening and closing tag. And if you pass in a value in between the tags, like my button, this value will actually be passed into the component as a property called children. Now, right now, my TypeScript has, of course, no definitions for which property the button component accepts. So we get the error, the type children of the type string. So this string will be passed in as a children prop, has no properties in common with the intrinsic attributes of the component. So let's go ahead and define an interface I usually set up interfaces for my props. I'll call this button props, and of course it will be an object containing a children prop. And if you would read the React and TypeScript documentation, you will know that, oh, whenever you pass in children, that type should be of the type React node from React. And a React node is really just anything that you can render as JSX. It can be an element, a component, it's just a single string. So this children will be of that type. And then, of course, in the props themselves, we'll pass in that object and we'll destructure them into children, which sounds really strange out of context. And we'll set the type definition to be of our button props. And now, of course, instead of hard coding click me or whatever, we can pass in the children property, and now it will say my button. So now if we have made our reusable button already a bit more customizable, so I can say click me, and this second button says click me. So this is kind of like how you would write a normal button with some content between the opening and closing tag, which is quite nice. Now, of course, we need to be able to make the button do something when we actually click it. And right now, the component does not allow an onClick property. In fact, it allows none of the properties that on the button we would be able to add, like all of these ARIA tags, or whether the button is disabled, or the ID of the button, or any of the many events that we might want to check for on the button. So we can't actually pass it into the component. Well, React has a very nice interface that we can use to basically copy the type definition of all of these attributes for the button and set them as props on our component. So we can extend our own interface from button HTML attributes, and this we need to pass in as a generic type the native HTML button element. So what this will do is it will read the attributes from this element. So this is the native button element type, and it will read the button attributes and create button props out of it. And we're just extending my own button props from that. So now, at least with TypeScript, it will understand that we can add onClick. For example, we'll have this function that runs an alert, and we'll say clicked. Now, right now, the button doesn't do anything because all that we have done is we've set up the type definition, but we never use that onClick. So what I'm going to do is use a very cool little JavaScript feature when you're destructuring, and you're destructuring from a big object. So these button props can be quite big, right? There can be loads of properties on here, like onClick, like ID, like all kinds of other stuff. But I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, I want to destructure onClick so I can add it to the button. And I want to destructure ID so I can add it to the button. I'm not going to do that for all of them. So we can use a cool JavaScript feature, which is the spread operator. And if you do that while you're destructuring in these curly brackets, you're basically destructuring the specific properties that you're naming, like children, which we use in specific places. But we're basically just saying, well, any remaining property, just create a new object out of it with all of the remaining stuff, right? So this props value will just have all of the potentially remaining attributes that we pass in via props. Well, now on the button, we can just use the spread operator again and take that props value, and then the spread operator, of course, takes a data type that has multiple values, like an array or an object, and treats them as individual values. So everything in this props object is now just individually added as an attribute to the button. So now, because we're passing in the onClick, it will be part of the props object, and we're just adding all of the props to the button, including that onClick. It will work. So now my button actually accepts all of the default attributes that a button allows, for example, ID. So if I just inspect this first button here, you will see it actually does have an ID. So we can treat this component as if it really was a normal button element. Now, why would we want that? Why wouldn't we just use a normal button element? Well, when it comes to styling with Tailwind, you'll probably end up with quite a lot of styling code. For example, if I do border 2 for thicker borders, and maybe we'll add some padding, so maybe px1 or maybe 2 py1, something like that. Maybe something like that's fine. Maybe we want a hover state on here, so hover pg neutral 200, so we have this kind of dark or light gray hover effect. You know, this can already be quite a lot. And if I need multiple buttons with all of that styling, you're just copying the same class list with Tailwind classes over and over. And if I want to make a change to how all of my default buttons look, I have to go in all of these elements and change their style, their classes. Now I just need one place where we have the styling. But we're not done yet, because sometimes we actually want to override styles. So let's say this click me button, or actually let's add another one, and we'll call this delete. So I want a button that deletes something. Now, in order to make it clear, this is no ordinary button, it's an important button or a dangerous button, you're doing a potentially destructive task, I may want to say, well, let's just change the class name of this button, because the class name, of course, is a property that we can now pass in, because class name is just one of the attributes that we are treating as properties, that we're passing in as properties potentially through this type definition here. So we can definitely also add a class name on the actual element, and let's do like bgred500, for example. Well, nothing is happening just yet. Why is that? Well, I can guarantee you that that class name property, this is definitely a property, will be passed in through the props object, because we're not destructuring it, and it will be passed onto the button, but then we just have another class name which overrides the previous class name. Now, if I actually apply the props after the original class name, now we are overriding the original class name. So we have no border, no rounded edges, no padding, but the props are applied. So we either have to choose one or the other. Now, there's actually an npm package. So npm TailwindMerge. And this is a utility function. For some reason, the documentation is gone. Let's go to the GitHub. So TailwindMerge, there we go, gives us a, oh my god, there we go, gives us a function called twMerge, and we can just pass in multiple strings with Tailwind classes. Here's the first string, here's the second. And if there are classes like padding and background that you're also using in the second string will override the ones in the first string. So the actual result, the return value of twMerge, is it still contains this hover bg dark red, because it has not been overridden by the second string, but it will have padding 3, because the padding 2 and padding 1 px py has been overridden, and the custom background color has overridden bg red, and that's exactly what we need here. Let's go ahead and install this package. So let's go ahead and npm I tailwind merge. Tailwind dash merge, not merger, merge. That's it. So now what I can do is I'm just going to wrap this string in curly brackets so I can run some JavaScript, and we're going to import twMerge. So import twMerge. And then the default styling we have here will be the first argument of the function, and the second argument, well, we're just going to have to destructure class name from the props, and now we can specifically apply that class name prop over here. And look at this, now we actually still have the unoverridden border and padding, but the only thing we are adding as a class name prop is the background red, which is simply going to override whatever the default background is, but it's going to merge it together with the other stuff. So that's already a nice start. Well, let's say that pretty much all of the buttons will look like this this default primary button. Then it's fine to just have a few buttons that you're kind of overriding some stuff. So maybe I want a slightly different delete button. Maybe I want a background red 500, text white, border none, so I don't want any border. And the hover should now have a bg red 600. So now I have a completely different delete button. Well, the problem is now I'm kind of styling my buttons where we're making the markup of our page, not in the component. And if I only do this once, it's fine, but if I need multiple delete buttons, we have the same problem as before. Now I have a lot of ugly code, and if I want to change what my delete button looks like, maybe I want my like the font to be bold. Now I have to go into all of my buttons and change the font to be bold. Ideally, I want to just have one button component that does this for me. Now, of course, what I could do is have another delete button component. But what I am going to do is set up a component variant system, where we can pass in a property. For example, I want something that looks like this. Let's just add another button here. So I want basically to be able to specify like, oh, variant should be the delete button or the maybe like danger variant, right? So then we have our primary button without the variant prop. That's just a normal one. But if I specify a different variant, then I want it to take on the different styling. So in here then we basically have to choose, hey, if the variant is danger, well then we have to apply the classes for that danger variant. Now there is a very nice npm package that will do this for us, and it's called class-variance-authority. And what it allows us to do is define this function where we pass in an object where we can define all of these variants. So this is the primary styling, and this is the secondary styling, and this is the small styling, and this is the medium styling. And all of these variants you can choose via props with your React component. You can also specify which are the default variants if you don't specify them in the props. In order to apply this, however, we will also need another npm package. So that package is called CLSX. And together with TailwindMerge, we get this stack of TailwindMerge CLSX. For some reason, npm doesn't show the documentation in the page anymore, so I can't show you a code example. But basically what CLSX does is it conditionally chooses classes. So the class-variance-authority chooses, or it has the configuration of which classes there are. CLSX will then choose which of them to use, and then we have multiple strings of the variant for the small variant and the type variant and the color variant and whatever. And then we merge all of them together on top of the base styling with TailwindMerge. So it might be a bit vague with me just explaining it, but let's install all of this and you'll see it in action as we apply it. So let's npm install CLSX and class-variance-authority. Shouldn't take too long. There we go. Let's go back to our page. So what we're going to do is go back into the button, and first we'll set up these variants. So I'll make a separate variable below my component called button variants, and we'll run cva. That's the function we get from the class-variance-authority package. And this function will need your base class. This is the class, or the classes, at least the string, that will be applied to all of the variants. And in my case, the only common thing between all variants, I want the border or the border radius to be rounded. So we're going to apply rounded medium. That's the only common thing I will have. Then we'll have this config object where we will define each variant. And I'm going to have a type variant, and I'm going to have a size variant. So you can have multiple other ones. And for example, for type, I want a primary type. And then we can just define what the styling of that should be. And it will basically be all of this stuff here. So let's cut this out. And we'll just remove this TailwindMerge here for now. Just make this an empty string here so that we don't get any errors. And I'm just going to paste in the styling that we have by default. But now we don't have to supply rounded because it's already part of the default styling. So if I choose the type variant to be primary, it will be that button that we had before with the black border. But I may have some other variants that I want, like a secondary button that I may use in other situations. So there we'll also have a border too, but then the border will be white. And actually the padding we are not going to take in the type. That will be part of the sizing. So we'll leave that out. So we'll have a border white, and actually we'll just hard code a BG white as well for the default one, but then the BG for the secondary will be black. And we'll hard code in text black, and here are hard code in text white. So you get a black button with a white border and white text, instead of a white button with a black border and black text. So it basically inverts the colors. And then for the hover state, I will have BG neutral 800, so that instead of being close to white, we're going close to black. And you know what, let's also implement that danger button. So that will be pretty much the same stuff. Let's just copy all of this. Danger. And instead of border 2, I'm going to say border none. So we'll have no border. So we don't need to specify a color. The text will be white, but the background will be red 500. And for the hover, we'll have red, I guess, 600. So now we can quite easily specify the stylings for each individual type of the button. For the size then, we'll maybe have a small button where we have text small, maybe padding X 1 and padding Y 0, which you basically don't have to specify, but because we're going to do the same stuff with the other ones, I think it makes sense to show, oh, this small one actually doesn't have padding. Now we have a medium size and maybe a large size. And this will be text base, so the normal base text size. And we'll maybe increase the padding a little bit and a little bit of padding Y. And with large, I think XL might make sense here. And then we'll do something like, so PX maybe 4 and PY 2, maybe something like that. Anyway, so we have a couple of variants defined. We are not using them in the button just yet. That will come in a second. So now that we have the variants defined, we also want to define the default variants. So if I don't specify which variant the button should take on, well, what should it put in the class name? Well, we're just going to say for the type, and you can see that this is already typed by TypeScript. So for the type variant, just use the primary by default. And for the size, use medium by default. So this is the configuration of these button variants. So now what we need to do is 3 things. We're going to call, in order to create a class name for the button, we're going to call button variants. That's a function that takes in an object, and in that object we need to specify which size and which type we want to select. I'll leave this empty for now, we'll come back to this. This will return the kind of the configuration we have here. We have to pass it into CLSX. Make sure we import that. And CLSX is going to then apply or choose which of these classes it needs to take based on those conditions. And then we want, because we then get multiple classes, we get one for the primary, we get the base class, we get one for primary, and we get one for the size. We need to merge them all together with twMerge. So we get this kind of weird stack of functions. In order to make this a bit cleaner, however, what most people will do is they will create a function in a different file, which will do all of this. So let's create a util folder for utility functions. And you'll often see people make a file or a function called cn for class name. So let's export default function cn. And we will spread inputs of the type class value. And these come from CLSX, I'm not sure which one here. It's kind of weird. And it will be a class value array. So a class value will be either a single string, but it could also be an object similar to how this kind of looks, with like this class and then a true or false value, which is what this button variant will return. So it will return true or false if it needs this class or this class or this class. So it's kind of a structure that says, oh, we want this class and we don't want this class. So these class values can be all of those things. And it will be an array because we might have multiples. And we store them as inputs. So then all we're going to do is just stack on twMerge, CLSX, and we'll take in the inputs in there. So it's kind of like a little utility function which makes the code here a lot cleaner, because now we don't have to do all of this. We only have to do cn. Okay, so just a little bit cleaner. Now, we now have to pass into the button variants which variants we have chosen. And we will get that, if I just clean this up here, from our props. Now, I could manually say, oh, the type prop is either primary or secondary or danger or whatever. But luckily, we can actually infer the types straight from this button variants variable. So on top of extending these attributes, we're also going to extend from variant props from class-variance-authority. And then we have to pass in the type of my button variants variable. So here we've already defined the types of all of these variants. So type could either be primary, secondary, or danger. And that's what this is going to feed in. Let's see, what's the problem here? Button props cannot simultaneously extend types and variants. Ah, okay, so the name property type also exists, of course, in the button attributes, because there is a button attribute called type. So you know what? Let's just rename this not to be type, but just the variant. Which variant of the button do we want? The primary, the secondary, the danger button. There we go, it's all happy. So now we can destructure variant, because it's part of the props. And we can destructure size. There we go. And we just pass them into the button variants function, which is going to return those classes. So variant and size. And here we can actually also dump in class name. And all of these will be merged together with our cn function. And as you can see, we have our default button without any size or primary or a variant. But here I still had that variant danger, and you can see it has taken the danger variant. And if I get my secondary, and this is all type safe, so if I say variant is, it only allows me one of those selections. And now we have the black button. Let's try the sizes. So we'll have size, well, of course, medium is the default anyway. Right, so medium is the default. But now we have maybe SM for small, LG for large. And we have a small button and a large button. And it's quite easy to just modify these, because you scroll down and say, oh, large is a bit too much padding on the y-axis, so I might change it back to 1. And there we go. Right, so that looks pretty cool. And so it's really easy to just add more variants, add or modify them. And you don't have to actually mess around in the messy code of your component. This is a nice structure, it's objects. So it's structured, it makes sense where is what. And then over here, this is clean code as well. So that is how we create reusable components. I can pass in, I can even make like a large with the variant of danger, like a large red button. It will just merge all those classes together. I can pass in an onClick or any other event or attribute that we can pass into the button. Delete, this might be my dangerous action. Okay, so there we go. That is how we create reusable components. How cool is that? So hopefully you enjoyed this video. Hopefully you found this really useful. Let me know in the description what you thought about it. If you want to see my future videos, make sure you subscribe. Then you will be alerted or you will see these videos on your homepage. And otherwise, I will see you next time. Thank you so much for watching.